What's up, Mortgage Coach community? Dave Savage coming to you live out of WeWork, Portland today. And I am super pumped about today's interview with Greg Harkavy. What's up, Greg?
How are you?
I'm doing good, buddy. So I am pumped. You know, we had an interview that we were planning to do today, and we've changed it recently. And it was inspired from a conversation Greg and I had, what was it, about 2 weeks ago at the Building Champions headquarters?
Yep. About 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think you flew in, you know, Bill Hart was in town, Michael was in town. I think you guys had the whole crew,
the whole
Building
team.
Champions coaches.
Yep.
Yeah. So guys, the conversation today is about how to turn technology into a competitive advantage. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart. That's something that I've really dedicated past 21 years of my life to. How can technology be a competitive advantage for a mortgage professional? How can it be a competitive advantage for a branch, for a region, for an entire mortgage company? And here we are in 2019, and the world is driven by technology. You know, when you look at the biggest companies with the highest valuations, they're technology businesses. And so technology's changed the world, and here's the deal. I just got back from Digital Mortgage Conference last week. So I was one of the speakers at that event. It was a who's who of innovators and C-suite executives. And one thing that I came away as a big takeaway is that the mortgage industry is no longer that far behind when it comes to tech. Like I used to always be like, oh, the mortgage industry's in the Stone Ages. And I'm telling you, man, we've got a lot of money in our space. We've got a lot of great technology talent in the mortgage space, and mortgage companies, you know, they're getting after it. You know, when you look at how an application is taken, it's like digital mortgage 101, check. We have deployed tech, we're focused on tech, but here's the other thing I know, is that there are some companies, some branches, some regions that are turning that into a distinct competitive advantage. They're closing more loans, they're doing it faster than ever. And I'll tell some stories sprinkled throughout this call. But my personal epiphany is when I look at the branches, when I look at the regions, and I look at the companies that are doing it right, it's all about leadership. You know, leadership is what powers that success. Self-leadership, team leadership, enterprise, culture leadership. So I wanted to bring Greg in. Greg, I know you're excited about this conversation, right?
Giddy, I think's the word I used. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the word he used. Yeah. So why don't we kick it off? I think most people know you, but some folks on the call still may not know. They know Building Champions. They may not know Greg Harkavy. So tell us who you are, and then tell us a story, you know, from a leadership perspective, you know, what put you on the path that you're on right now.
Yeah, thank you. So it's an honor and privilege to be here. And I was thinking about that even earlier today. That's the same thing that I would say for leadership. If we see that as an honor and privilege when we're in a role of leadership, we'll talk about the different levels. I believe everybody's a leader. You have different levels of responsibility, but the honor and privilege of leadership is huge. My background, I was in the mortgage industry for 13 years. Had the chance to work for a direct lender that serviced all their own loans, then went to a startup that started as a broker and then became a direct lender. So I was able to see a lot of different aspects of the business while being a producing branch manager. It was a small company, but wound up being the top originator in that company while I was there. I was able to deploy a vision of what I had hoped for culturally and the experience for my clients. That was while I was also being coached by my brother, Daniel, in it. And I got to see all these principles live out. And about 20 years ago, I realized that I would have significant regrets if I didn't take the leap of faith and become a coach myself. But there was a pause in that because I didn't know if I was necessarily born to be a coach. And this is where my leadership journey starts in. Ever since I was a little kid, I was fascinated with leadership and organizational structures. And it first started with teams, sports. So I had my favorite teams and I would watch the front office. I'd watch the decisions. And as a fan, I would say based off of what the front office does will dictate my fan history. So I wouldn't necessarily just follow the players, but I'd be deeply connected to watching what happens with how do they make decisions? How do they retain key players? then I would look at the coaches and see whether or not they were able to inspire teammates and to put out a winning game plan. So this is at a young age. All the while, I noticed in myself, I always looked at human potential. And I would see people with this incredible God-given talent, and they would either apply it or they'd waste it. And that would burn a passion in me, because I consider myself as someone that was given average talent, especially around athletics. I'm topping out at about 5'8". I have a lot of heart, but when you want to play football and basketball, that doesn't help a lot. And I didn't have tremendous speed. So when I saw people that had these talents, it's like, are you applying them or wasting them? The coach's heart was born in that. The leader's heart was born in that. Then I became involved in student leadership. I was asked to become a freshman senator. And in order to say yes to that, you also had to take a year-long course in leadership. And that's really where my early fire of saying, okay, I've seen it conceptually. Now I get to learn what leadership's all about. And 20 years of coaching, being an executive with this company, having the opportunity to lead, not just go from theory. I also know how hard it is. Leadership is beautiful, but it is tough. And anybody that's on this show right now knows, from a leadership position, it's one of the most challenging things I think we ever have, and one of the biggest responsibilities, because we're supposed to take care of others. So that's my journey. That's why I'm passionate about it. I've studied leadership for decades now, as well as having the ability to be one myself.
I love that. I love that. And I don't know the exact quote from Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership. Well, I guess I do. You know, there are no bad teams, just bad leaders. And after I've read that book, I get into situations, and I just think it's true. You know, every time you find a team performing really well, there's just a great leader behind it. And usually there's multiple great leaders. And I think when I look at the companies that adopt technology really well, the branches, the teams, there's always a leadership story behind it. And so one of my goals with this call is to give the mortgage coach community of loan officers, branch managers, regionals, heads of production, CEOs, there's going to be a little bit of a rant, but there is going to be, at the end of this, a playbook and forget mortgage coach, let's be agnostic to technology, whether it's your CRM, whether it's your point of sale software, whether it's mortgage coach, you know, any technology that you're rolling out, we're going to give you a playbook of what great leadership looks like, sounds like, and what are the rhythms of that. So over the course of this hour, we'll unpack that for you. So I don't know where you want to start with this, but let's, you know, at least get definition of what is leadership, maybe a little bit of what's the difference between management and leadership out of the way, if you don't mind, Greg. Just put some color around that.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of us have read Maxwell's books or heard him talk about leadership, but it starts with the key point is leadership is influence, and it's not just from position. I think a leader is able to cast a vision and then help people achieve that vision together. I think a leader is someone that actually looks at themselves more as someone to help other people achieve results. So they're others focused, they're mission minded, and they're really clear. Why are we here? What do we do? And what is it that's special about what we get to do every day? They bring in people to buy into that same shared vision. But really, when I look at leadership, that's looking at human potential. It's looking at mission. Management is super vital, but you don't manage people. You manage processes, you manage results, you can manage finances. I think if you really look at managing people, you're missing the human element of what a leader does differently, is they understand the talents and the capabilities and desires of the people that they get to lead, and they draw that up. They do something different with it. So they see the necessary time spent in relationship to get to know the people they work with. They develop talents, they challenge them, they stretch them. They maybe get them to see what they don't even see in themselves. What's the best future version of themselves? We can expand on what leadership is, but I just think the difference between management, very necessary, but managing processes, finances, things of that nature, quite different than what I would consider leadership.
Yeah, agreed. And I do think when I look at the success stories, there is both happening. You know, like if you are not looking at the results, and recognizing, and I'll use mortgage coach as an example, but if you're not looking at who are the people that are, they've upgraded their behavior. They've gone from not using it to using it. So if you're not managing that and looking at the numbers and measuring it, you can't recognize them at the right time. So, in order to be a great leader, there are metrics, especially when it comes to technology, because that's what this is about. This is not just leadership 101. This is, hey, you've deployed technologies and now you want to turn them into a competitive advantage. So you need to do both. You need to manage and you need to lead. Any distinctions that you would make from everything you just said? Cast a clear vision, document that, be clear about it, with technology. Because there's, hey, I'm building a culture, there's a company mission, but is there any distinctions or nuances when it comes to turning tech into a competitive advantage from your perspective?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the belief of a leader to know that technology is going to be a difference maker. Like, you have to have that belief. What I see in the best leaders, especially in this industry, they're fully embracing technology. They know it's a competitive advantage, but they also understand the real work that has to happen. And I think that's where the origin of our conversation started to kick in with technology, that leadership has to be fully committed to say, hey, this is a neat concept versus no, we all together in this organization need to adopt and embrace technology to create a competitive advantage. So they commit resources, time, energy, training, buy-in amongst everybody to say, this is why technology matters. It is, as you said at the beginning of this meeting, it's our reality. We're further along in the industry than we think. What I will say is I feel like it's a bit of an arms race in the industry. I feel like everybody's talking about technology and we've got to get our digital mortgage to this level and have the interface and the experience there. Yet the real winners are figuring out, how do we take technology and the human side of the business? How do we meld them together really successfully to create an incredible experience? And yep.
So go ahead.
It's just adoption, I think, is the real key.
It is. And I think, there are technology ways to improve adoption and integrations, making sure that, not only are you giving this family this, awesome experience that has everything they need from point of sale to advice, but giving your loan officers that. And so, I mean, the integrations that are taking place are super important and super vital to adoption, but leadership is still trumps it all. And so let's talk about some of the things that we think are like tactics of good leadership when it comes to turning technology into competitive advantage. And let's also call out some things that are like some don'ts or some common things that we see people miss. And remember, community, this is an interactive mastermind. So if you're watching this on Facebook Live, and you have a question either live while it's happening or while you're watching the recording, let us know. And I'll integrate those conversations into what we're doing here. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this started with a curious conversation a couple of weeks with you, Dave. We were talking about what separates maybe, and I know this is a mortgage coach agnostic meeting, like you're saying, forget what the technology platform was, but I was super curious as far as the do's and don'ts with companies and organizations that are really heavily using mortgage coach versus those that aren't. And something just popped in my head was, what else is a leader competing with to give the attention to what matters most, to whether it's a regional manager, area manager, down to the originator? How many messages can you give at a certain time as a leader to say, this is what's most important, right? And I think so in technology, if it's a front runner, I also think the best leaders, we have to say, okay, well, what are they competing with? And we started talking about this concept, which really comes from Dr. Henry Cloud in Boundaries for Leaders. And he is a subject matter expert around neuroscience. He says there's three things that the executive functions of our brain must have to set people up for success. And the number one executive function is attending. And attending basically means that we are attending to very clear goals. We know what we want to achieve. So if technology is important to a leader, that gets elevated, but it's going to compete with other priorities. I think all of us are so busy that we get distracted fairly easily. It's not that we're not intelligent human beings, but all of the inputs we have If we don't have very clear goals, I even think about if anybody's been in a Lamaze class and they're talking about breathing and finding a focal point when you're in labor. And as a guy, please don't mistake, I don't understand what labor pains are, but I know what it's like to be a partner with my wife. But they say focus on something in the room, find your center. It's the same thing as a leader. You have to attend to something that keeps you absolutely on point to get to the mission. The second function is inhibiting. And I think this is the missing piece for most of us. If you have clear goals, then it's inhibiting all the other distractions. If it's not critical to the mission, if it's not critical to saying, hey, we are really going to take a competitive advantage with technology, you're asking people to do a lot of other things. It might be, okay, what are our typical KPIs? Are we hitting the numbers? Are we hitting our margins? Are we living out maybe some of the convictions? Whatever it is, and then you take in all the outside factors, the market shifts, governmental intervention, whatever it may be. A leader has to inhibit all the noise to say, let's get back to what we're attending to. And we have to have this mission around technology. The third thing is working memory. That's a third executive function. And working memory is really coming back to the plan, saying, okay, what was that focal point? How do we progress against it? And are we measuring progress along the way? What I think happens in that middle, the inhibit piece, Dave, we just get distracted. We start out, but we don't finish. We think we've got momentum, but it doesn't actually become a habit. And it's because there's so many competing priorities. So I thought about this even today. I think a leader that really is committed to this is competitive advantage. And the word is ruthless. You have to be ruthless against competing priorities that aren't in alignment with what you said was most important. So if you're going to make it a competitive advantage, you need to make sure that that's what's got the attention. So bit of a ramble.
I like that. No, it was good. And I think any leader, kind of really knows what you're talking about, because we're in the mortgage business, and there's two kinds of loans with problems and loans with solved problems. So, and if you manage a lot of people, you manage a lot of people problems and a lot of process problems. And so, I mean, everybody in the mortgage industry, they're getting after it. They're busy, but, really focusing on a new technology that you rolled out, it's hard, especially to do it consistently. So I'm going to call out a few things that I've noticed and stories where I've seen leaders excel with Mortgage Coach. And you could really I could tell this story around a CRM. I could tell it around Mortgage Coach, but it's where the technology is not only powering an important business goal, but it's powering the values of the business. So like in the case of Mortgage Coach, we help loan officers deliver a better advice experience. And whether it's a branch manager, regional leader, head of production, CEO, where that CEO buys into, I'm obsessed with delivering the family the best advice experience, where they're, I think you said ruthless, like I believe that that's a competitive advantage for me. So hey, they roll out Mortgage Coach, they put resources behind it, they show up to some of the most important training events. They don't have to show up to every training event, but the launch of the event, they show up. I think you brought that up, just being present. Like, I'm here, this is important. And then I think, the thing I see, which is probably the biggest mistake in the business, is we roll out technology for a month, for a quarter, and then we're off to the next shiny light. And there's not enough constant leadership presence until they hit an adoption goal. And here's my belief. It's not a choice. Like, you have to be successful with point of sale experience. You have to obsess with an advice experience. If you're a referral-based local lender, that's got to be your competitive advantage, or one of them. And success isn't an option. So it really comes down to, do you stay present and focused until you hit it? Like, let's just say 50% of your loan officers are doing X the way they need to be doing it, before you become, distracted. Any thoughts around that? Any advice to leaders who want to do better, following those thoughts?
Yeah, you really have to think through a long-term plan on anything like this in adoption. I think it all starts at, what's our core purpose? What are we here to do? in the mortgage industry, you're not in technology. So you're not actually delivering technology. You're embracing technology. So I look at it, and I'm just going to tell you that if you really believe in creating exceptional experiences and making the mortgage process much better than it is today, and you keep looking for ways to make it a better experience for people, so you can focus more on best advice, giving the best solutions, best communication to your clients. It starts with that core and understanding where technology is a part of the solution. Because I think sometimes what happens is we look at it as an add-on rather than a catalyst to our main mission. So if you're really clear on your purpose, then I think it starts to make more sense saying, this is why technology has to be embraced. It helps us actually achieve our purpose. If it's just one more tactic to possibly get us an advantage, I don't think it lasts. I think it's got to answer a deeper why. And that's number one.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. You know, and you're kind of right. It's almost like where a mortgage coach is super successful or where a CRM is super successful, it's when that leader has really got clear on how that technology enables that value or that purpose to live. Really good point.
I mean, we have such a long relationship, and we think very highly of you and mortgage coach, but the truth of the matter is, the way I see it is, you're providing a real value to the borrower, to the realtor, whoever you're working with, to be able to understand and see things in simple terms as far as what choices should I make. It's an incredible service. So I look at it and it's like, well, if anything in technology, it should be to assist people, not to replace people, not for cost efficiency. Those are nice benefits, but that's not the end. You know, it's just parts of how do we stay profitable and sustain, but it really should ultimately answer, in a service-based business, how do we provide a greater level of service?
So let's talk about the types of documentation a great leader has when it comes to, you know, their vision, their values. Let's just go through the library. And then I want to also go through, you know, what are the communication rhythms that great leadership has. And let's try to do it from branch to executive level. You know, like if you think there's a difference, call it out from, you know, the very top of an organization to the branch manager. So what are the, you know, the checklist of things that a leader should have, you know, documented and be clear on?
Yeah, well, and I'm going to speak in Building Champions language, but we have a visioning process. It's a document, and we call it 3B Vision, and it really answers three aspects. The first B is around belonging, and it answers, what are our core convictions? Who are we, and what do we deeply believe in? So that's a part of what your identity starts to kick into gear on, around, okay, where does technology fit? Does it not? But when you understand what your real convictions are, it starts to clarify everything else you do. The other part of what we belong to is, what's our purpose? Why do we exist? What would happen if we didn't exist in the marketplace? What would people lose out in? So you start answering the why piece in your identity and what people are going to belong to. So in our visioning process, I think that's central. When we work with organizations, it may start with an individual leader. So if you're at a branch level or you're the CEO of an organization, you are the catalyst of visioneering. Not everybody feels like they're visionary, but if you work on that process, that's the beginning. You have to get it in writing. I've met some incredibly visionary people in the business, and they can tell you stuff verbally. Then I ask them, have you documented your process? And they're like, no, it's in my head. I'm like, that's fantastic. But what about everybody else that needs to understand it and see it clearly? And how do you hold accountability towards something if it's not in writing? Because your narrative can change over time, but when you put something in writing, it provides direction and clarity. So that's the first B that we talk about. The next one is, what are we going to become? Where are we headed? What's the future hold for us? And this is where you can talk about different key areas of the business. What's the client experience going to be like? Where does technology fit in? What do we believe about how we want to build a team ourselves? You start to think about the future of what we're going to go out and do. And then what do we actually create What are our compelling ambitions, the larger than life goals, and how does that fit in? So you start to answer these things in a written document. One of the keys is the leader might start it, but I see, just like adoption in technology, when it's a shared vision, you start with yourself as a leader, but you have to get buy-in. And I find that the most powerful thing is when you have more than one author. I think even the foundations of our country, our forefathers were all authors of what our country stands for. Well, I think of visions the same way. When you start including people in a little bit earlier in the process, they take personal ownership of the vision. And that's where the beginning of adoption happens. So number one, go through a written process. Even if it's not ours, make sure that you document it in a way that answers why we're here, what we're about, and where we're headed. I think if you have those components, that's the start point. Then you got to be able to cast it.
So let's do this, and then I'm gonna have you share. Okay, so we've got front end. This is what we do at the front end. Now there's just the regular quarterly, monthly, weekly things that you do, and then after you share that, I'm gonna just share a perspective on Mortgage Coach. Where we're agnostic to technology, and we're just technology's an advantage. I'm gonna drive what I think is you want to be successful at building an advice-based culture. I'm going to give you my playbook on that, have you give some color on it.
Awesome.
But why don't you talk about that? So I've got the plan documented. I do want to remind everybody, if you go to the Building Champions website and you go to the resource section, they have a lot of tools there for both vision casting, life planning, business planning. So, go to buildingchampions.com, check out the resources. Highly recommend you follow their podcast, you follow all the content. Building Champions, you guys do a great job of, if you want to be a leader, tune into Building Champions. You will grow your leadership just through a lot of the free stuff that you guys provide. So why don't you walk us through that? We got it on the front end. What's some of the follow-up stuff?
Thank you. And one of the tools we have is we call it a vision communication tool, and it really does walk through what we see as the best practices. And this tool was created from really the core question we're trying to answer. Why do some companies really execute vision well throughout the organization, and why do some not, or even down to the branch level? So these were all the things that we found, best practices. Number one, if you think you've talked about it once a year and that's enough and people will get tired of hearing it, that's not true. You should be talking about your vision weekly at the minimum. So what we do, even internally, and we have our clients do, is have some sort of weekly message around some element of your written vision. Tie it in. Say, hey, this is what we've noticed, or perhaps even illuminate somebody that did something that helped you move forward towards the vision. So I think a weekly check-in on the vision, it doesn't mean you have to talk about the entire, it could be, today we're just talking about this in vision. So weekly messaging, I think, is critically important. Building strategy, making sure that your business plan is actually tied to the vision, is a real differentiator. And what I see a lot of times, Dave, is most people have business plans. That is a regular discipline in this industry, and pretty much most industries. Some might have a compelling written vision, but even fewer have a vision that actually connects to their strategy and their plan. This is essential because I think sometimes the vision's over here, but it doesn't really answer what we do in our daily business. You got to connect the dots. You have to figure out how to operationalize the vision into your strategy, from your strategy down to your plans, and measure progress against it. If you're doing a business plan that's separate from your vision, you're doing the business over 1 year at a time rather than continually building towards something greater. So I think that's one of the things we look at. And this is probably where that attend piece of being ruthless is. If you're taking something on new, a shiny new object, does it get you further or distract you towards your vision? So you have to have regular review meetings on a quarterly basis. Whoever your leadership team is at the C-suite level, you should be having executive retreats quarterly, purely thinking on things like vision and culture and how we're doing and making progress towards it. So that quarterly discipline, I think, is really huge. If I'm a branch manager, I want to look at a vision from a scope of, are we really creating what we want to? Are we having regular meetings as a team? Are we living out our convictions? Are we doing the sorts of things where we're building a team towards a bigger goal? Are we looking at the talents that we have, making sure that everybody is contributing in a way that they understand absolutely what I do here matters and it's connected to the overall goals of the vision. The key is regular discipline, connecting the business plan to your vision and really thinking through, even down to 90 days, what are we going to do in the next 90 days that helps us move one step closer towards the vision?
I love that. So quarterly, monthly, weekly, can't over communicate. So I'm going to share my screen and do, I don't know, like 3 minutes on, and just give an example of what I think, where the mortgage industry is at when it comes to, you know, competing on price. Because let's face it, you know, one of the big challenges today is rate shopping. And one of the macro problems of tomorrow is competing with technology companies and disruptors. And like, when you really think about, you know, how loan officers quote rates, I mean, I started this business 30 years ago. So I started in the 80s, but I was trained by people, you know, that started in the 70s. And this is how we delivered a point of sale experience, you know, and how we quoted rates. And then in the 90s, you know, we started giving fee worksheets. You know, still doing fee worksheets 10 years later, 80s, 90s, you know, coming into the meltdown, coming out of the meltdown. We really did not, as an industry, innovate the point of sale experience. We did come up with a product and pricing engine. So instead of stacks of fee worksheets, we improved how we price, you know, optimal blue. And today, most loan officers in the industry still quote rates, all driven from this. This is where I want to, like, there's technology. Like, you know, when I went through this is like the technology that delivers the point of sale experience. But here's the thing, to get technology to use, you also need to change how loan officers think. Like, this is how most loan officers think. This is their value prop. I can close loans faster, easier than everyone else, and I have great rates. And then I deliver that technology experience. And I call that the triangle of the transaction. You know, it's rate, it's monthly payment, it's cash to close. That's transactional. You will get rate shopped, and technology will not be a competitive advantage if your loan officers think transaction, they talk transaction, they deliver a technology transaction experience. And that is what most of the industry does. That's what 95% of loan officers, lenders, that's what they automate, and that's what they power. And like, I'll just give mortgage coaches an example, you know, because I get asked all the time, like, Dave, you do a lot of interviews. You know, why do you do multiple interviews? How do you do so many interviews? And part of it is like, why? Like, I realized that mortgage coach technology, you know, what you're looking at is an app. It's awesome. It's beautiful. Graphs and charts, any mobile device, it shows up well on. But I realized in order to get a loan officer to use this technology, I need to get them to think differently about the transaction. And we call this the mortgage coach advice star. I need them to go from triangle to, you know what? You got to show cost over time. And you need to show strategies like, hey, what if you prepaid your mortgage? Or what if you invested the difference? Like, that's strategy. And that requires more than technology. And so, you know, my formula, I don't want to call it simple. I think it is pretty straightforward and simple. It's to over communicate an advice experience powered by technology. And that requires me as CEO to identify stories within our community of 12,000 loan officers, leaders within our community of both the coaching community, trainers, you know, leaders, and then to create content and stories that are both stories and strategies, how to be successful with the technology. So, you know, one thing I would say at this point, it's like when I look at the leaders in the mortgage coach community that kill it, they understand that mortgage coach is a technology, but they also understand the soft skills that go around that. And they're looking for stories to shine a light on and then to package, promote within their organization. So Greg, does that resonate with you? And any stories come to mind to help kind of, and whether it's Mortgage Coach or it's some other tech, any other stories come to mind?
Well, it's funny. I was, as you were going through the dates and the different technology. So I got into the business in 1990. And if anybody has been in the business that long, you remember, like, if you had an FHA application, you couldn't have any typos. You couldn't have any whiteout. You had to start from scratch. So when technology started to form where your 1003 could be done electronically and all those errors before printing, and that went away, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It created more capacity for processors, but it really should have translated into a better experience for the client as well, because we could give our attention to them. Well, fast forward to 2019, and what I'm hearing you say, it isn't about technology. I think the core is you have to have a belief that you're offering a service that matters and differentiates yourself from your competition. And that care is something that you might see other people administer, but until you care deeply enough about the experience and to give the advice to say, let's look at this strategically. Let's consider all of your options. The real catalyst at all, I think today, and more than just even 30 years ago, some of the things that have not changed about the business, whether you had to hand type a 1003 or you had to get technology, what hasn't changed is the human experience on the receiving end of going through the process. If you are in the business and you haven't gone through a loan yourself recently, I recommend do it again to create more empathy. But this came back to me, Dave, and I shared this with you, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Had a weird sort of date opportunity. It's a discipline that my wife and I have a date once a week. The only window I had was my wife said, well, I'm getting my hair done. Do you just want to come by the salon? Maybe bring like a charcuterie plate and some wine, and we'll just kind of hang out. So I'm like, well, I'm going to take it because we'll still connect. And while your hair's getting set, we'll be able to talk alone. So I walk in, and my wife's hairstylist talks about a nightmare mortgage experience. This is 2019. Okay, if anybody that's done a loan for a hairstylist, you know they're independent contractors, a little more complex profile on their tax returns. And she was so frustrated with all the conditions she was being asked in the last minute. And I'm like, oh my gosh, everything they're telling you is actually correct. The reason why they're asking for these things when you have large deposits, I mean, this is, just so you know, this is like normal underwriting type stuff. The problem was she wasn't being communicated with. Nobody took time to tell her why it's important. How do we give advice? How do we help you navigate? I'm like, wow, is this 1990 or is it 2019? It's still the same core story. People need to be communicated with. They need to be informed. And as a subject matter expert, and that's why technology matters, it should provide better communication so your borrowers understand the process, they understand why you chose this versus that. And when you do the star rather than the triangle, I think what happens is price no longer matters because they know they can trust where you're taking them because you're communicating with them, you're answering their questions, you're informing them. It's a whole different deal.
Yeah, there's.
Sorry, I'll let you go.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, you go.
In our community here, it may seem like, isn't that normal? It's still exceedingly rare. There are more people out there that are your competition that aren't embracing that. Today, still the reality. You have new people coming into business. They weren't brought into the same value proposition. So go ahead.
No doubt. And my hope, the takeaway from anybody watching this, whether you are individual loan officer, and you do have a team, your processor is part of your team, your clients are part of your team. When forget about whether you're a branch manager or not, if you're a loan officer without an assistant, your leadership, how you show up as a leader to your borrowers, to your referral partners, to your back-end team, it will distinguish you. Leadership is the most important power. And if you want to turn technology like Mortgage Coach into a competitive advantage, grow your leadership. And you will grow your success using Mortgage Coach, using your CRM. So just to close out on, let's just call it team leadership, and then we've got about 20 minutes left. Let's talk about self-leadership, because I think we've covered the organizational leadership. I mean, again, we could talk for days. We could do a workshop on this. You could spend a lifetime on this.
Yeah.
and that's why you have to constant reminders. I mean, that's why I interview multiple people per week, because I'm getting different perspectives from different parts of the country, from different mortgage models. And there's a story, there's a strategy, and it's constant. Because that's the other thing, we forget the law of forgetfulness. So I think it's important as leaders, you can't forget, because if you forget, you know, the company culture doesn't move forward, technology doesn't move forward. You know, as the leader of the company, you need to make sure you're doing that weekly communication around your values, around your mission, and then you're including the technology that you want to have a competitive advantage. Like, if you believe your loan officers need to be advisors using Mortgage Coach, there should be a story. It doesn't have to be a Mortgage Coach story every week, but there should be a Mortgage Coach story probably for sure every quarter and probably every month that you're identifying, you're packaging, and you're promoting. And then again, you got to promote things in different channels. I mean, that's why we just started our IGTV, Instagram TV at Mortgage Coach. You know, we've got this YouTube channel, we have this successful Facebook channel, but more and more mortgage professionals are living, learning, and doing life on Instagram. So we're putting our highlights on Instagram. And so I push everybody in the Mortgage Coach community, if you want to be successful, turning technology a competitive advantage, weekly communication, I would say, is most important. I don't know, maybe you would say the mission and vision. Documentation is most important, but to me, if you just communicate weekly with your tribe in a compelling, effective way, you're going to do pretty good. Any thoughts on that before we transition to self-leadership?
Consistency. I mean, at the end of the day, that's it. So being consistent, I think, wins, and that persistence wins. So however you're using technology in that, don't dabble around the edges, be all in, be disciplined. That's what I think wins at the end of the day. You know, so before we pivot to self-leadership, I don't know if there's more thoughts there, but a lot around self-leadership.
Yeah, well, I would throw to the community, I'll check Facebook and Zoom in a minute. Like, if you do have questions for Greg or myself, or you want to just weigh in with a takeaway on this topic, comments down below, we'll check it out. So yeah, let's pivot to self-leadership, because at the end of the day, the person at the top, the team leader, needs to demonstrate self-leadership, and everybody needs to demonstrate self-leadership. So what are some things that you see as a coach, and what are some things at Building Champions that you guys focus on when it comes to self-leadership?
Yeah, and we believe self-leadership precedes leading teams or organizations. So no matter what level, as an individual, you're the only person that's responsible for leading yourself. So first of all, acknowledging that, but I find those that are constantly curious are the ones that continue to develop. So self-leadership is realizing, and I love how you shared all the different interviews, all the different perspectives. Self-leadership, I think, at the very beginning means I know who I am, but I know also that the future version of myself has a chance to grow. The best version of myself hasn't yet started. So when you just start with that, realizing that if you're not dead, you're not done, as a principle, that if I'm not dead, I must be here to grow. Like that you have to have a growth mindset. That's the first part, I think, with self-leadership. So that's the start point. Then what do I do with it? If you don't have a self-development plan, a growth plan, that's the first thing we would recommend. Life planning is one aspect of self-leadership and self-development, but it's also be curious, like understand, who are you? There are so many wonderful assessments out there, from DISC, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, all these different things, EQ assessments. Understand what your makeup looks like, understand your strengths. I mean, StrengthsFinder, it's just, the more you can learn about yourself, it shouldn't make you a narcissist. It's creating self-awareness. And when you have self-awareness, that's the beginning of what I'd consider emotional intelligence. So once you understand, this is what I'm really strong at, this is where I struggle, start to develop a plan for you to maximize your strengths, fortify your weaknesses, but really understand and have self-awareness as a start point. Know what's important to you. I mean, there are fundamentals in self-leadership. your learning plan. Like, what are you reading? What are you putting into your mind? I truly believe our minds are malleable, our brains are malleable. So how we think is based off of what our diet is. So think about things that are good and think about things that cause you to see the world differently than your own limited view. There's a book that I read years ago by Larry Osborne, and he talks about the notion of a lone ranger. He says the thing about a lone ranger is they'll never understand anything other than their own perspective. So a part of self-leadership is seeking people for other perspectives. You need to have wise counsel, no matter what level of self-leadership. So it could be in your community, it could be a coach, it could be peers, but make sure that you're putting people that you see are living out successful examples of self-leadership, hang out with them. You are who you hang out with typically. So you want to hang out with people that are constantly learning and growing. I feel like I can keep running towards a lot. I kind of want to pause and let you interject here.
You did. I mean, there was just so much gold in that, guys. And literally, you could just, like, the past 5 minutes where he went through all the different thoughts of self-leadership, we could spend a lot of time on all of those things. But first of all, I want to remind you, the community, you have a voice. We've got some really nice feedback. Lynette said she loves the star in the triangle. Thank you, Lynette. And I'll post examples of those in the group. Roberto said, you guys rock. Thanks for all you do. Roberto also said, yes, I need a self-growth plan. So let's talk about two things. And if we have time to talk about a third, we'll do that. I want to talk about just that own it mindset that you talked about. Because I mean, I don't care who you are. I mean, I take a lot of pride that, like, I own it, but I'll catch myself, blaming my team, like, God dang it, why aren't they connecting? And so we all do that. And then I know there's a lot here, loan officers blaming company for different things that own it. You know what? I mean, that's what makes the mortgage business awesome, is that we get to invent how we show up in the market. I don't know too many companies that say, you have to work with a certain type of referral partner, and you have to do this certain type of loan. And, like, guys, we get to pick our personal brand. We get to pick our market strategy. I think it's a mistake. You get to pick whether you deliver the triangle of transaction fee worksheet or the mortgage coach star of advice. You get to pick at most companies, whether you deliver an average experience or you deliver an amazing experience. So that's cool. So why don't we talk for a few minutes, Greg, around for people that are blaming, like, let's just talk to a group of audience that's, like, in the blame game right now, how to get out of it. Like, you're in this circle where you're blaming below or you're blaming above. Any coaching advice to, like, get out of that circle of blame and take ownership over everything that you have?
Yeah, you have to be able to get honest with yourself. I think sometimes when we get into blame, we don't feel safe. We actually might think poorly of ourselves, and we're projecting out because we don't want to deal with it. So we're not open to the possibilities of learning something different. So whenever you're maybe thinking it's this or that, rather than I have to look inwardly, I would challenge you to say, what can you learn from opposing viewpoints? What can you learn in the absence of what you believe you need to succeed? And own that piece. Anytime you make an excuse for not being successful by blaming outside factors, you already know you're on the wrong track. You have to be honest with that. So if it's hard to get there and you're saying, no, you don't understand my story or whatever it is, it's like, well, you still have a decision to make. If you're going to blame others, and this is not what we coach, but at the end of the day, all the free opportunity to be an entrepreneur, if you don't like your environment, guess what? You get to choose to go somewhere else. So whatever you want to blame, if you don't like leadership that you're at, if you don't like a platform where you're at, if you don't like the pricing strategy where you're at, you own that. Nobody says you have to go there. Oftentimes when I'm meeting people in the middle of a struggle and they're trying to figure stuff out, I'll take them down to the bare bones. I'll say, okay, can we talk about your finances for a minute? How much cash reserves do you have? What do you really need to do to be successful? Because I think what happens is the mindset is we feel like we have to, we don't have a choice. Whenever people feel like they don't have a choice, they start to resent and they'll start to blame. But you all have a choice. I mean, you really do. You get to choose where you work. You get to choose how you show up. You get to choose how you think. So the more that you can categorize, and this is an exercise we'll do, is we'll talk about the 3 buckets. There's 3 buckets of everything that's going on. Buckets of things that you can control, buckets of things you can influence, buckets that you have no control over. And we'll go through this inventory with somebody that feels stuck. It's like, all right, the things that you can control, what can you do? The things that you can influence, spend your time and energy on those 2 buckets. And you got to figure out what to do with the you can't control. The can't control, if it's where your blame's going, then it's like, well, you have to shift your mind or make a decision. Because you can't change people typically. You can't change things that aren't within your control and influence. That's how you get unstuck. But if you're getting into the blame piece, now you're spending time and energy instead of thinking about how do I go out and meet new opportunities? How do I learn new things? You're stuck in what you don't like. It's a waste of time and energy personally, but I hope it doesn't come off as judgy. I look at it as life is short. Choose not to go towards blame and say, what can I control or influence more often?
Love that. And just know that there are people that are killing it. You know, if you're producing, killing it. And if you're leading, you know, we have companies and organizations that have 70% of their loan officers adopting, 50% adopting.
Yeah.
You know, there's just success stories to be had, and it just comes up with that belief, and then the presence. And let's transition to what should you be putting in your mind. And I have a horse in this race, so I am Mr. Mortgage Coach, and I, you know, control the media that we put in our Facebook group, that goes on to our YouTube channel, which now goes into our IGTV, Instagram channel. And I would just throw out there to everyone, if you believe your loan officers need to be advisors, and you believe that they should leverage technology to deliver the best advice experience, it is a place that you should be consuming content. And it is a place that you should be leading your loan officers to consume content. And I would say weekly, you know, like weekly consume content in our channels. That's what we create it for. But I mean, I'm Mr. Mortgage Coach, and those are my values, and that's my mission. Greg, what are some other things that people who want to just grow leadership as a whole, you know, what should they stop doing and what should they start doing when you say, you know, it's what you feed your mind? How would you coach someone to kind of change the mind diet, and where would you put them?
Yeah, and sometimes this requires somebody else in this interplay, but the self-awareness thing, understanding what the tapes are. Why do you think the way you think? What are you actually thinking? And capture that first and ask yourself, are these positive or negative thoughts? And if they're negative or they're unresolved, what do I do next to get to a better place? So I think just being able to hear our inner voice is a start point. But the more we actually feed our minds with positive, good stuff, we start to see things differently. When we get stale as human beings, it's usually because we're not learning something new. We're looking at everything as the same every day. So our loops start to go there. So yes, leadership books. I love leadership books. There's all sorts of principles. One of my favorite books it's Lincoln on leadership. And, you know, from somebody that I've never met, I feel like what he gave more than our country, but to me personally, to say, oh my gosh, there are different ways for us to lead. So constantly be learning. I think books are huge. I think technology with all the different platforms, I would ask yourself, are you feeding yourself things that are valuable? This guy right here, I mean, with everything you're talking about, you know, there's so many different things that can distract us when we get back to attending and inhibiting the executive functions in our brain. If you're not consistently on a daily basis doing things like meditating, prayer, exercise, having healthy relationships with the people that are most important to you, creating space for conversations, things that make you whole, like number one, that's it. Just like the mindset of growth, I think if you can cultivate curiosity, like truly be curious, what else can I learn? And I think the learning avenues start to come, whether it's attending seminars, whether it's going to a TED Talk. We don't lack good content available, but we should start with what do we believe we want to learn about? I find learning opportunities in every day. So I think it's just even in that, it's like, what am I learning new that reveals more about me and how I can relate and give value to others? That driver, I think, has to be there. I wouldn't say, well, you got to read these books only. I don't want to limit thinking that way, but you're disciplined to make sure that you're constantly thinking on things, like pausing enough to think and reflect. That's probably the start point. And then create your plan. Say, oh, these are things I want to learn about. Where do I get the resources? You can Google just about anything.
Love it. And personally, guys, I kind of think like there's work, how much hours am I spending working, and what are the 3 things that drive my work success? How much time am I spending entertaining myself? And if I'm watching Netflix, it's probably entertainment. If I'm on Facebook, I consider one of my jobs as a community builder around Mortgage Coach, but there are things that I do on Facebook and Instagram that are pure entertainment. And there are things that I do that are community building. If you're a mortgage professional, there's marketing that you do, but there's also entertainment. So you got to really look at those ratios. And then I would push everybody in the Mortgage Coach community, make sure that you're educating yourself on things that you want to learn about. You're using every channel out there, audiobooks, reading books, podcasts, social media. If you're going to consume it, make sure you're consuming things that are making you happier, making you more successful, and making you a better leader. And everything that Building Champions does, guys, if you are not following them on all social media channels, you're making a mistake. The content that they put out is very intentional. It's high quality leadership content. You guys have a podcast now, so make sure you subscribe to that. Would you mind just making sure everybody knows the educational channels that you guys have? Because if you want to grow leadership, I think everyone should be tuned into it. If you could just give us a list, Greg.
Yeah, and thank you for capturing all that. Simply if you go to our website, www.buildingchampions.com, we have a resource section. It'll direct you to the link to our podcast, so you can download it from there. It goes, right to it, whether you have a Droid or iPhone, it'll give you all the different links. Thank you for sharing. So all of our tools are available. Dave, you're doing a fantastic job if you're driving the screen share right now, but the resources are there. Yeah. And sometimes we want to kind of safely explore before diving in, and that's totally fine. That's why we put all these resources. We want to push out something of real value. Our mission is to impact people, and we don't always have to have a direct hand in it. That's why content's provided. But I also would say that we want to talk with you if you want to have a conversation, no obligation. But if you're like, I need to know more and understand what this process looks like, our heart is to every time we come in contact with somebody, to have a positive and lasting difference in the life of each person we meet, one person at a time. That's our purpose. So it could be from the content that you get at our website, but truly having a conversation, it's not a hard sell. We just want to make sure that even if you talk with us for 30 minutes, do we do something to help move you forward? So all of that's available. The resources are there. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so guys, you can clearly see where Greg's heart's at. Greg, this has been a fantastic hour of value on leadership. I know we're going to be cutting this up, putting something on IGTV from this interview. If you're watching this, we want to make sure that the content we create for you is meaningful and valuable. So if there was a highlight from this, let us know in our Facebook group, or let us know on social media in comments down below. Dave really loved X. I'd love to play that at my next sales meeting, or I'd love to forward that. So if you saw something from this interview that you'd like us to turn into some micro content, let us know. And know that that's one of our goals. We've got a lot of 1 hour interviews, not a lot, we have hundreds, over 1,000. And if there's something that you want us to turn into micro content that you can use as a leader, let us know what it is. Greg, super grateful for the friendship that we're building, for the value that you bring to the mortgage coach community. You got a minute left. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I want to thank you because of all the content. When you talk about self-leadership, you are creating a platform for making people better. And that ripple effect from an individual self-leadership to who you impact on the other end. I know you're not going to take that praise necessarily, but truly you're modeling what we're talking about and you're providing so much value to everybody. So thank you.
Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Everyone have a great day. This call is a wrap. Appreciate you, Greg.
You too. Thank you very much.
Bye.